The first time I realized Carter Wells had no idea what he was doing, he pointed at the wrong signature line on a federal contract and asked me, "This where I John Hancock it?" I didn't flinch. I just handed him the correct page, the one labeled "for RFCO use only," and said, "Only if you've cleared with Defense Contract Audit Agency protocols and have a registered number on file." He blinked like I'd just asked him to solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded. Then he laughed. Not a real laugh, one of those thin, nasal chuckles Ivy League boys use when they're out of their depth but still think their MBA will float them. I went back to reviewing the clearance ledger. He went back to thinking the company ran on vision boards and quarterly sizzle decks. I'm Jane Rallis. For 12 years, I was the name on the federal forms nobody read unless something went catastrophically wrong. Registered Federal Contracting Officer. Doesn't sound sexy, does it? That's the point. It's not the kind of title that gets you LinkedIn applause or a reserved parking spot, but it's the name the federal government looks for before they even think about wiring you a cent. It's the name that gets emailed at 2:06 a.m. when an agency can't find a procurement cert. It's the name that, once removed, can quietly set $480 million worth of contracts on fire without striking a single match. Before Carter arrived, things ran like they always had. Slow, layered, but lawful. My days were paperwork, sure. But that paperwork held teeth. I ran 6 active contracts across 4 federal agencies, all marked restricted, direct signature only. My initials weren't decorative. They were a legal precondition for everything from classified site access to payment authorizations. And I never once missed a deadline. Not once. But that kind of record doesn't impress men like Carter. He came in wearing a blazer that looked too tight across the shoulders, all swagger and breathless buzzwords. First town hall he hosted, he called the compliance team our lovely background players. Half the room went stiff. The other half wrote down lovely background like it was their new job title. Still, I stayed quiet. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means watchful. You learn more listening to men like Carter than arguing with them. He brought in consultants to audit non-essential functions. Never mind that every RFCO credential had to be backed by 5 years of continuous compliance. Never mind that defense logistics requires a 2-week hold every time there's a change in officer designation. He said things like, "Why do we need a dedicated signature when DocuSign exists?" I smiled, closed my binder, and made a mental note to print the exact clause from the 19B compliance rider, the one that reads, "No active federal project may proceed without a current and verified RFCO signature. Alteration without review constitutes immediate grounds for suspension." But even then, I didn't raise a hand. I just moved a few files to a personal archive drive. I started carrying a second badge in my purse, the one with my inactive clearance date still showing in the upper right corner, and I kept attending every meeting they forgot to remove me from. It's funny what people will say around someone they think is irrelevant. And hey, before I go further, since 97% of y'all listen to these without hitting that subscribe button, do me a favor and smash that, like hit subscribe and turn notifications on. That's what keeps stories like this going. Trust me, what's coming next? You're gonna want to be here for it. Back to Carter. The real kicker came during a Wednesday compliance recap. Carter strolled into the room 10 minutes late, Starbucks in hand, and waved off the agenda. "We're pivoting to agile reporting. Legacy sign-offs are being retired," he said, not even looking at me. "Retired? That's how you describe your uncle who moved to Tampa, not a credential that determines the legality of federal transactions." I raised an eyebrow, but I didn't speak. He didn't ask. And when the meeting wrapped, he had his assistant email the new org chart. My title? Compliance Liaison Advisory. Advisory. That's what they call you when they want to keep you close enough not to blow up the system, but far enough away that they can pretend it's their idea when the ship hits the rocks. So I cleaned out my desk, just the visible parts, left the plaque, took the binder, the one with 12 years of clause annotations, clearance chains, and every federal contact I'd ever worked with. It was labeled in plain black Sharpie, Fed Cred, Active. Carter strutted around like he'd just reinvented the Pentagon. And me? I just smiled. Because the thing about RFCO signatures, they're not decorative. They're detonators. Carter started cleaning house like a kid drunk on his first sugar rush, tossing out years of protocol with the same smug enthusiasm he probably used when firing baristas for getting his name wrong at Starbucks. He called it strategic streamlining. The rest of us called it what it was: corporate arson dressed in a Patagonia vest. One by one, he slashed anything that didn't fit into his slide decks: backlogged clearances, redundant review cycles, mandatory hold periods. You know, the boring little firewalls that keep companies from accidentally laundering taxpayer money or losing access to classified weapons systems. At first, he left me alone. Maybe because I smiled too calmly. Maybe because he assumed my silence meant complicity. Or maybe he just didn't understand what an RFCO actually was. But eventually, every storm gets curious about the foundation it's ignoring. It happened in the hallway, like all bad decisions disguised as casual conversation. Carter caught me on my way to the break room, sipping whatever passed for coffee in that building. He stepped in front of me way too close with that salesman grin stretched across his face like he'd just closed a deal on a boat he didn't pay for. "Jane," he said, like we were co-conspirators. "Quick heads up. You're not going to be the sign-off on the new federal pipeline. We're modernizing the process. No hard feelings, right?" I stared at him. No questions, no memo, no counsel present, no DCAA liaison, just a hallway ambush and a smile like he'd done me a favor. That's the thing about men like Carter. They don't understand the weight of a process until it crushes them. I gave him the same smile I used at my daughter's second-grade parent-teacher conference when the principal called her bossy. No emotion, just pure archival precision. "Understood," I said, and I walked away. I didn't argue. I didn't make a scene. I didn't email legal or throw a Slack tantrum. I went back to my office, shut the door, pulled the Fed Cred active binder from the bottom drawer, and started a new section: unauthorized role adjustments. First entry: Carter Wells. Effective date: today. Supporting evidence: hallway comment. Witnesses: none. Compliance consulted: none. Status: credentials still active until formally revoked via federal registry. You see, stripping someone of their RFCO designation isn't a matter of opinion. It's not a box you check on a form. It requires coordination with internal legal, federal notification, and a replacement officer to be listed and approved before the original credential can be sunsetted. Skip a step, and you're not just violating policy. You're inviting the Department of Defense to your office with a clipboard and a shutdown order. Carter didn't know that. He thought cutting my access was like revoking a gym membership. Meanwhile, I sat at my desk, printing out the compliance memo from 2 years ago that confirmed the renewal of my designation through 2026. I printed it 3 times, one for my binder, one for my off-site file, and one just in case anyone tried to lose the digital trail. The next day, I checked the federal registry. My name was still listed. No replacement, no notice of change. He hadn't even bothered with the basics. He just assumed that stripping me from the org chart was enough. I clicked Save Page As and dated the file. Documentation always wins, even when the people in charge think the rules are just paperwork. Over the next week, Carter started hosting operational modernization meetings. He rolled out new org charts with a bright yellow box labeled Compliance Consolidation. I was now Special Advisor, Process Documentation. No signature authority, no clearance key, just a fancy way of saying, put her in a corner until the feds stop asking questions. They wouldn't stop. I started getting strange CCs from former partners. One email simply read, "Who's handling 2743E?" That's a weapons-grade compliance file. Restricted review, RFCO only. I replied with one line. "No one has notified me of a replacement. Please escalate via federal protocols." That email got forwarded. A lot. By Friday, I noticed Carter had started using his own initials on internal memos tied to federal project filings. Cute. He must have thought it made him look official. I printed those too, highlighted them, and I updated the binder again. Every document, every misstep, every assumption. I wasn't building a case. I was preparing an obituary for his career. The first time Carter mentioned the $480 million renewal, he acted like he'd personally discovered gold in the HVAC ducts, stood up in the war room with his sleeves rolled like a hero in a procedural drama, and said, "This is the kind of thing we can actually move on now that the bottlenecks are cleared." Translation? He'd booted everyone who understood the rules, and now he was free to play pretend CEO. I sat in the back of the room. No title, no access badge, no email invites. I wasn't even supposed to be there, technically. My calendar still had the recurring strategic oversight review, and no one had remembered to take me off it. I never reminded them. I just walked in with a coffee and a clipboard and nodded at whoever looked confused. People assume you belong when you look like you've always belonged. Carter called the renewal project Project Ascend. Of course he did. He had a thing for names that sounded like energy drinks or failed crypto coins. He handed out sleek little tri-fold roadmaps labeled Velocity, Vision, Victory, like this was a sales pitch and not a federal clearance pipeline. The contractors smiled. The legal team nodded stiffly. HR clapped like they were trying to summon morale from the dead. Me? I took notes, not publicly. God, no. I wrote by hand in the margins of an old RFCO manual I kept tucked in my bag. A dead giveaway if anyone looked closely. But no one ever did. Week by week, Carter's meetings got louder, shorter, and dumber. Legacy blockers became his favorite phrase. He said it with the same disdain a teenager reserves for dial-up internet. At one point, he even joked, "We don't need 6 layers of sign-offs to order a damn printer. Why should we need them for clearance routing?" There it was. That itch behind the eyes. That subtle realization that someone thinks you're dumb because you never raised your voice. I didn't flinch. I just wrote down the date, time, and exact quote. I made a separate section in my binder labeled Verbal Misrepresentations Contract 480 Method. The thing about silence is it's easy to weaponize when everyone else is performing. Around week 4, I overheard 2 interns whispering in the hallway like co-conspirators in a heist movie. "Did you backdate that clearance approval on the Form 12B?" one asked. The other laughed and said, "Carter said if it's already going through, we can just log it later." I stopped walking, just for a moment. No expression, no notebook, just filed it in the cabinet in my skull labeled Audit Triggers Intern Idiocy. I kept moving. You can't scare people if they don't know you're watching. Then came the email. Not to me, of course. I only saw it because someone on the admin chain accidentally left the shared drive permissions wide open. Urgent. Federal review advanced to June 3rd. That was 3 weeks earlier than expected. A classic shift. Feds like to catch you raw before your PR decks are printed and your lipstick's on straight. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I closed the drive window, quietly opened my drawer, pulled out the binder, turned to the tab labeled Review Schedule Audit Projections, slipped the printout inside and added one sticky note in red, Window Narrowing. Carter had no idea the game clock had changed, no idea the refs were walking into the stadium, no idea the playbook he was using was about to get torched under a compliance spotlight. And me? I wasn't playing anymore. I was just waiting. It was a Thursday night when I finally checked the federal contractor registry. I was sitting at my kitchen table, laptop open, the glow of the screen painting everything in soft blue like I was running a surveillance op from a suburban war room. I'd just reheated leftover lasagna and was halfway through a glass of red I didn't really want when the page loaded. And just like that, there it was. No name, no designation, no registered federal contracting officer listed for our company. No replacement either, just a blank entry marked pending review. I stared at it for a long time. My cursor hovered over the page like it could will my name back into existence. But I wasn't surprised. I'd known Carter was reckless. What I hadn't known was just how thorough his stupidity was. He hadn't even bothered appointing someone in my place, just deleted and moved on like it was a Slack status. That blank field wasn't just an oversight. It was a legal death sentence. I clicked the Save as PDF button and named the file RFC Removal on NoReplacement.pdf, filed it under a folder on my encrypted drive. Ascend 480 mem. Triggers. Then I stood up, walked to my filing cabinet, and unlocked the second drawer, the one with the brown accordion binder I hadn't touched since my last clearance renewal. Inside, I pulled the original RFCO appointment letter, wet signature, dated, notarized. 3 witnesses, 1 board seal. I laid it flat on the desk, then opened another tab and printed out the internal termination form Carter had uploaded to the HR compliance drive. His name. Digitally signed. No legal witness, no counsel review, no board vote, just a little checkbox that said, reallocation of role per internal modernization strategy. He might as well have written, I hope this bites me in the ass. The contrast between the two documents was night and day. Mine looked like it could get someone into a Pentagon sublevel. His looked like a brunch receipt. I clipped them together and added a sticky note that read, compared to 19B, contract clause integrity, fade reviewable. Clause 19B was the kind of language you only understood if you'd spent a decade parsing contractees so dense it made your eyes twitch. But I knew it by heart. No active federal contract may proceed, renew, or be maintained without the continuous verification of a current RFCO. Termination or alteration of this designation without federal notice and counsel review constitutes breach of federal compliance. I highlighted that line 3 times in yellow, then again in pink, then again in red. That clause wasn't just important, it was a fuse. My hands were steady as I worked. No anger, no panic, just the calm of someone planting tripwire in a field they used to mow. At 11:42 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text, unknown number, but I knew who it was. Hey Jane, it's Will McRae from DCAA. We're on site Monday, 9 a.m., just confirming RFCO status. Hope all's well. I stared at the message. Will and I had worked together for 8 years. He once brought me coffee before an 18-hour review marathon in 2017 and told me I was the only reason our company didn't get flagged for procurement lag violations. If he was texting, it wasn't a courtesy. It was a warning. I didn't reply. I just opened a fresh folder, labeled it Audit Day. Then I turned off the kitchen light, finished the last of the wine, and went to bed with one final thought. He removed the wrong name, and now the page was blank. Monday didn't arrive. It descended, like fog before a wreck. The kind of morning where the air tastes like it's holding its breath. By 8:52 a.m., the boardroom looked like it was hosting a TED Talk on ego. Carter had printed his little Ascend Initiative trifolds again, each one annoyingly laminated and fanned across the table like he was about to auction off a timeshare. He wore his navy blue Trust Me suit and that same stupid grin he pulled out for photo ops and firings. Federal audit team arriving at 9 on the dot, he chirped to the assistants like he was inviting them to brunch. He even put pastries on the table. Croissants, like a snack, could distract a DCAA agent with a badge. I was already in the room, sitting near the back corner, the one with the warped outlet that no one ever fixed because it wasn't mission critical. Fitting. I had no badge, no nameplate, just a neutral pad folio and the same old clipboard I'd used since 2012, the one with faded pencil marks along the edge that only I understood. Carter gave me a nod as he walked past. Appreciate you sitting in, Jane, he said, like I was an intern doing coffee duty. Let's show them how modern compliance is done. He had no idea. At exactly 9 morgue, the audit team walked in. 3 agents, standard suits, no smiles. One of them was Will McRae. He didn't make eye contact. That alone told me we'd passed the point of mercy. Carter stood, clicked the remote. Lights dimmed. A slide flashed on the wall. Operational evolution. Streamlining for the future. Jesus? Thanks so much for coming, Carter began too loud. You're going to see a really exciting shift in how we handle federal engagement. We've cleaned up redundancies, accelerated sign-off protocols, and frankly, eliminated the legacy drag that was slowing down our ability to serve efficiently. He clicked again. The new org chart appeared, names boxed in blue, arrows flying everywhere like someone had thrown a spaghetti plate at a whiteboard. Will opened the manila folder he'd been holding, thumbed to a specific page, and that's when the room changed. He didn't clear his throat, didn't make a speech, just said one sentence flat as concrete. One question: who removed the registered contracting officer from the clearance filings? Carter paused. You could see the wires shorting out behind his eyes. His face twitched, then smoothed over with a salesman's charm. Oh, that. Yeah, he said, waving a hand like it was a menu typo. We restructured that role, legacy position. Didn't match the new compliance strategy. He wasn't needed. The room tilted just a hair. Will didn't look at him. He looked past him, straight to the corner where I sat. I didn't nod, didn't blink. I just sat, clipboard on my lap, watching. Carter kept going, oblivious. See, we've got this new interface that allows for real-time clearance approval workflows. More efficient, less red tape. Will closed the folder. What's the name of your currently listed RFCO on sam.gov? He asked. Carter's smile faltered. Well, I mean, we've got a few interim personnel handling parts of that now. You don't, Will interrupted, voice flat. Your registry entry is blank. No design e-listed. No federal notification of role change. No counsel authorization filed with a termination document. Silence. Even the croissant stopped breathing. Carter opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I turned one page on my clipboard, and Will said it again, quieter this time. Who removed the registered contracting officer? No one answered. I didn't need to. The audit had begun, and so had the reckoning. Will reached into his briefcase, slow, methodical, and pulled out a thin folder with a red tab clipped to the corner. That tab wasn't decorative. Red tabs meant something. It meant the federal government wasn't just asking questions anymore. They were now waiting for someone to lie. He didn't hand it to Carter. That would have been too merciful. He turned and slid it to Marianne, our in-house legal counsel, who up until this moment had been sipping chamomile tea like she was at a yoga retreat. Her hand trembled just enough to make the folder rustle as she opened it. Everyone leaned in, instinctively, like the air had shifted and our collective survival now depended on whatever was written inside. She scanned the page. Her mouth tightened. Then she read it aloud, because federal audits don't deal in whispers. No active federal project may be maintained without a currently registered RFCO. Alterations to this designation, if unaccompanied by federally authorized replacement and council approval, shall result in immediate suspension of contract eligibility. Carter blinked, smile frozen in amber. His lips parted, but no words came out. Please tell me, Marianne said, voice low and cutting, that you didn't revoke her credentials without federal notice or a replacement. Silence. Carter opened his mouth again. A sound came out, something between a grunt and a wheeze. Will didn't flinch. He simply took the folder back, clicked his pen, and marked something on a government-issued form. One small check mark, but it echoed like a bell tolling for a very expensive funeral. I sat back in my chair, legs crossed, calm as a cat on a windowsill. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I just watched the power drain from Carter's face like a kicked-out plug from a wall socket. He turned to me. Not all the way. Just enough that his eyes met mine for the first time since the day he told me I was non-essential. There it was. Recognition. Not regret. Not apology, just the slow, dawning horror of a man who realizes too late that the bridge he burned wasn't made of wood. It was holding up the only road he had left. I thought, he started, grasping for some explanation that wouldn't make him look like a walking lawsuit. You thought wrong, Marianne said, cold, flat. She'd gone pale. Jane's designation isn't just internal policy, it's tied to every single active contract we have. Her removal triggered an automatic compliance void. Will chimed in, voice like granite. Which means your eligibility for the $480 million renewal is now in immediate review suspension, effective now. Someone dropped a pen. No one picked it up. Carter turned to the screen, still projecting his proud little org chart. His box was still highlighted in yellow, Chief Operations. It looked like a joke now, like someone had accidentally let the mailroom intern design a federal infrastructure plan. Marianne stood up slowly, the folder still in her hand. We'll need to contact the board, she said, immediately. Carter tried to speak, then stopped, because there was nothing left to say. He didn't just make a mistake. He pulled the pin, and I was the grenade. Will stepped into the hallway, didn't even close the door behind him, and made the call. Suspend active evaluations pending officer verification, he said, voice flat as a dial tone. No drama, no announcement, just those 8 words, enough to set the building on fire without a single flame. Inside the boardroom, no one moved. The $480 million contract, months of Carter's swagger, his reorganizations, his shiny charts and bluster, was now in federal limbo. A ghost pipeline, frozen, null, pending officer verification. Me. Within minutes, the agency's internal portal was updated. I didn't have to check. I knew how it worked. I'd helped them build that process flow back in 2016 when half of it was still running on fax machines and federal-grade duct tape. I'd buried redundancies into the system that now, ironically, ensured Carter's entire pitch deck disintegrated faster than a wet tissue. Someone from procurement stepped in and whispered into Marianne's ear. She stood up and left without a word, folder pressed tight to her chest like a life raft. The screen still projected Carter's precious Ascend initiative like it hadn't just been vaporized. I almost felt sorry for it. Almost. Then the emails started. One after the other. You could hear the dings echo through the room like incoming artillery. Vendor response, clarification needed. Flagged, RFCO status breach, contract, number 2193F. Subject, renewal suspension, next steps. Every line of text a nail in the coffin Carter had been building in real time, smiling all the way. Carter stood up like he was about to take control of the room again, say something inspiring, offer a solution, flash that Harvard-light confidence, and reassure everyone with nothing but teeth and noise. But before he could speak, someone from the investor side leaned forward and said flatly, "You're benched. Don't say another word until counsel clears you." He sat. Hard. Like the chair had been pulled out from under his ego, and he just hadn't realized gravity still applied to him. I didn't move, still in the back, still silent. The rest of the morning was a slow-motion autopsy. Legal tried spinning up alternatives. Is there anyone else with a compliance designation? Could we reappoint an interim RFCO retroactively? Can we request a grace period? All answered with the same short response. No. Because you don't replace a registered federal contracting officer like a toner cartridge. It's not plug and play. It's not a warm body in a chair. It's a credential tied to federal databases, background checks, clearance trees, and years of historical filings. You either have it or you don't. And right now, they didn't. The boardroom's energy shifted from confusion to dread. Phones buzzed. Counsel called emergency sessions. Vendors began pushing back timelines. Finance issued a risk memo. I heard someone whisper, "Can we walk it back?" No, they'd already walked off the cliff. By noon, I got a discreet message on Signal. "Hey, you around?" It was from Will. I didn't respond. Not yet. Because the thing about watching a building collapse from the sidewalk is you're in no rush to run in and save the ones who lit the match, especially when they thought you were just drywall. By Tuesday morning, Carter's keycard was deactivated. No press release, no public shaming. Just a line in a company-wide email. Effective immediately, Carter Wells is on administrative leave pending an internal compliance review. No one clapped. No one cried. It was the kind of silence that says, we all saw this coming and none of us are surprised. I was already back home by then, sipping black coffee from a chipped mug that said, I read the fine print in faded letters. I'd printed it as a joke gift for myself years ago after surviving a 3-day compliance lockdown with a defense subcontractor who thought RFCO was a sandwich. Turned out, the mug had aged better than most executives. My inbox had swelled overnight, but I wasn't in a hurry. The company's legal team had sent 3 messages by 10 a.m., each one more desperate than the last. The final one was marked confidential, urgent opportunity for interim support. They wanted me back. Temporarily, of course, just to stabilize contract posture, just to reaffirm RFCO integrity in dialogue with federal partners. They tried to sweeten the ask. Double pay, flexible hours, immediate reinstatement of credential status with board visibility. I read the email once. Then again. Then closed the tab and dragged it into a folder labeled post-fall. Because there's something you learn after 12 years in federal contracting. Dignity isn't a line item, and mine wasn't up for sale. At 11:46, my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a while. Eric Blaine, VP of Compliance at Portwell Defense. We'd worked together years back, sorting out a multi-agency mess that nearly tanked their NATO pipeline. He was sharp, fast, and unlike most execs, knew better than to treat a paper trail like an afterthought. "Jane," he said, not even waiting for pleasantries. "You free?" I smiled. Depends who's asking. We just had a scare, credential lapse. Our RFCO filed retirement paperwork, and it sat in someone's inbox for 6 weeks. We're getting audited Friday. I leaned back in my chair. Let me guess. You need someone with an active file, federal clearance, and a clean decade of filings who won't panic when DCAA walks in with clipboards. He chuckled. You always were concise. I always had to be, I said. Men like Carter don't listen unless you speak in audit triggers. He didn't ask what happened. He already knew. News like that travels through the compliance world fast. Faster than gossip, slower than subpoenas, but always sharp. We'll make it clean, Eric said. Consulting retainer, no internal politics. I'll send terms this afternoon. I'll review and respond by end of day, I said, professional as ever, but the satisfaction coiled behind every syllable. By late afternoon, the documents arrived. Short, clear, respectful. No buzzwords, no performative mission statements, just the essentials. Title, authority level, scope of engagement, and a number that told me they weren't lowballing. At the bottom, one clause stood out. Final decision-making power regarding compliance interpretation shall rest with the advisor in accordance with federal protocol. I signed it, on my terms, not because I needed to prove anything. Not because I wanted Carter to watch me walk into a better role while his badge still sat deactivated in a box. I didn't care if he ever knew. This wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. Quiet, permanent, federally recorded, the kind you don't get in meetings with croissants. The final audit review wrapped on a Thursday. Gray skies, cold coffee, and the sort of eerie office quiet that feels like the building itself is embarrassed. No speeches, no ceremony, just a signature. Will McRae signed the federal clearance form with his usual clipped efficiency, then scribbled a note beneath his initials. All cleared, pending reinstatement of RFCO. That was it. That was the line that sealed it. No reinstatement. No renewal. No exceptions. And since I hadn't reinstated, the company was left balancing a $480 million opportunity on a technicality with teeth. My credentials still sat active in the Federal Registry, tagged externally engaged, non-resident RFCO. That wasn't a role they gave out often. It meant I could consult, advise, review, without ever tying myself to a single firm. The badge didn't live in anyone's HR system. It lived where it mattered, in the federal databases and the minds of the people who actually understood how thin the wire was between compliant and canceled. Carter never got to see the final audit note. By then, he was fully removed from internal communications, pending the results of the governance breakdown review. Translation: scapegoat season had begun, but his desk? That was still there, stripped bare. Just a half-dead succulent, a disconnected docking station, and one returned folder left open by legal. Inside, my old RFCO clearance packet, and someone, probably Marianne, had highlighted a single line in yellow 3 times over. Clause 19B must not be altered without counsel or federal review. It didn't need a signature. The sentence was already signed by my work, my filings, and my legacy. Carter never saw the ink. He just erased the name, thinking authority was cosmetic, thinking paperwork was permission, not power. He thought it was about titles. He never understood it was about signatures. Meanwhile, I was already a world away, literally. That morning, I walked into a new office in Arlington. Clean lines, thick glass, a plaque already mounted on the wall. Jane Rallis, registered federal contracting officer, external advisor. No fanfare, just quiet respect. People nodded when I entered, not because I was loud or charismatic or because I wore a badge that sparkled. They nodded because they knew. When it breaks, they call me. I hung my coat, set down my clipboard, opened the first file of the day, a renewal application from a tech contractor in Maine who had no idea how close they'd come to federal void status. They'd sent it with a sticky note. Please confirm correct signature location. I smiled. That's the thing about control. It isn't loud, it isn't flashy. It's a name you don't remove, a clause you don't touch, a single missing signature, and who it truly belongs to.